The fourth season of Money Heist picks up where Nairobi left off at the end of the previous season. The scene shows the situation inside the Spanish bank, where Nairobi is trying to be rescued by the other members. At the end of the previous season, Nairobi is thought to be dead, and the initial scene shows how she is still alive but dying. Although the members tried to save the life of Nairobi, who was shot in the chest, she begged to get out and surrender to the police so that she would be able to get medical treatment. On the other hand, Palermo communicated with the professor about Nairobi's situation and asked him to prepare a surgeon immediately. But things were no better for Professor. He was still pursuing the police team while his girlfriend Lisbon had been shot dead by the police. Professor then asked Palermo to wait until he was free from the police. After the phone call ended, the professor hid in the bull cage. Back inside the Spanish bank building, Palermo informed the other members about Professor's condition and how they would have to wait before getting a surgeon. But the Heist members were divided when they had different opinions on what to do with Nairobi. Palermo and a few other members argued that they should perform the surgery themselves to save Nairobi's life. Meanwhile, Nairobi pleaded with Tokyo and Helsinki to hand her over to the police. Palermo was immediately annoyed by their argument and finally brandished a gun at the members. He said Lisbon was dead, and Nairobi would suffer the same fate if they insisted on surrendering Nairobi. Tokyo finally agreed to conduct their operation in Nairobi on the condition that he would lead the process. However, this upset Palermo again, and they felt they did not respect him as the group leader. On the other hand, Angel Rubio brought the police force closer and closer to Professor's hideout until he finally took another step by calling Marseille and asking him to start executing Plan Hamelin. Marseille conducted Plan Hamelin by connecting the professor's phone to the police headquarters with a cell phone he carried around as far away from the hideout as possible. The plan went smoothly. Colonel Luis Tameo picked up the cell phone signal on Professor's phone and immediately sent Angel to a location far enough away from the hideout. The signal phone automatically saved Professor from the pursuit of Angel and his troops. Not only that, but Marseille also carried the cell phone as far as possible before finally crashing the car so that the police thought Professor had an accident. After that, Marseille went to the professor's place to save him. Inside the building, Tokyo led the Nairobi operation with the help of a surgeon who gave instructions via video call. However, while the process was in progress, Tameo discovered an internet connection in the building and ordered the network to be disconnected. Of course, this resulted in the video call connection with the surgeon being cut off, so Tokyo and the other members had to continue the operation without the surgeon's help. Fortunately, Tokyo still managed to remove the bullet from Nairobi's chest, and the operation ended well. However, after the operation was completed, Palermo caused a ruckus by attempting to leave the bank building. Palermo decided not to continue his involvement in the robbery because he was no longer respected as a leader. Tokyo and the other members tried to get Palermo not to leave the building, but Palermo threatened to detonate a bomb that would get them all caught. Helsinki ran between them after realizing that Palermo and Tokyo's stubbornness would not yield any good results. He tried to calm Palermo down before the other members managed to subdue him. After the incident, Tokyo reported to Professor and said they would arrest Palermo for making a scene. Hearing this, Professor was angry and told the robbery would fall apart if they captured Palermo. Because the robbery plan this time belongs to Palermo and Berlin, only the two of them know all the plan details. Professor looked devastated and emphasized to Tokyo that he hoped they would solve this robbery, especially after Lisbon's death and the state of Nairobi. With tears in his eyes, Professor also recounts how he heard the police shoot Lisbon. Tokyo, however, finds the story odd and says it's possible that the shot was his camouflage to fool Professor. Therefore, Lisbon might not be dead. Tokyo's explanation made Professor realize that perhaps Lisbon was still alive but had been caught at the police headquarters. Sure enough, the scene switches to show Lisbon or Raquel Murillo at police headquarters and interrogated by Alicia Sierra. During the interrogation, Sierra tried to extract information by offering Lisbon various possibilities. One of them was how her sentence could be reduced if Lisbon cooperated with the police to solve the biggest robbery case. On the other hand, if Lisbon insisted on being faithful to Professor, her sentence would become even more severe. At the same time, the free Professor might even forget about her and look for another woman. Sierra's words seem to work as Lisbon remembers all the fights and arguments between her and Professor before she gets arrested. Meanwhile, outside the Bank of Spain building, Professor and Marseille disguise themselves among the protesting crowd to learn about the situation around the police headquarters. After seeing no commotion at the police headquarters, which might have happened if one of the robbers had been killed, Professor was convinced that Lisbon was alive and being held inside the headquarters. Meanwhile, inside the Bank of Spain building, Tokyo had restrained and bound Palermo and placed him with the other hostages. Of course, this makes Palermo even angrier at the other Heist members, and he intends to disrupt their plans. Palermo talks to Cesar Gandia, the head of security for the Bank of Spain, who is tied up next to him. He taught Gandia how to break free. At night, Professor infiltrates the apartment of a policeman named Anton who works at the headquarters in front of the Bank of Spain. Together with Marseille, Professor threatens Anton to tell him about Lisbon, but Anton refused to open his mouth and instead chose to run away and jump out of the apartment window. Fortunately, Anton jumps into the swimming pool so Marseille can rush down to save him. At that time, Professor realized that they had to be calmer in negotiating with Anton to get information. Finally, Professor offered 1 million euros if Anton told Lisbon that the Professor would do anything to save her. Professor also said that he wanted to ensure Lisbon was safe and told Anton to show Lisbon the Professor's watch. The scene changes when Lisbon calls her daughter Paula Vicuna Murillo on the first day of the robbery. Lisbon, who was participating in the robbery for the first time, was nervous and worried about Paula's condition, so she decided to call her daughter. After the call ended, Lisbon burned the cell phone in the microwave. However, Alberto Vicun, a forensic officer and Lisbon's ex-husband, was able to find the SIM card fragment in the burnt phone. His investigation also revealed the location of Paula and Lisbon's mother, who was hiding in the Philippines. Anton heard about the information on the other side of the headquarters and immediately relayed it to Professor. Sierra returns to Lisbon in the interrogation room and uses the latest information from Alberto to lure Lisbon into opening up. She threatened they could arrest Lisbon's mother and daughter in less than 24 hours. After that, Sierra made a new offer, saying she could release Lisbon if she revealed the robbery plan and the Professor. Lisbon burst into tears, thinking that if she agreed to the offer, she could live in peace with Paula and her mother but betray the people she loved. When Lisbon is about to decide to cooperate with the police and contact the Professor, Anton enters the interrogation room. He pretends to give Lisbon coffee to show her Professor's watch. Inside the Bank of Spain building, Palermo was still trying to help Gandia get free. He said Gandia should try to free himself when it was Rio's turn to stand guard. The reason is that Palermo revealed to Gandia that Rio would not be able to shoot him. When Rio was on guard, Gandia took Palermo's advice and broke his fingers to escape the handcuffs. After that, Gandia got up and ran up the stairs. As Palermo expected, Rio could only shout and brandish the gun without actually shooting Gandia. The scene moved to a flashback of events 5 years ago where Berlin and Palermo came to the Bank of Spain disguised as security officers. It was then that Berlin met Gandia, who was then a bodyguard for the governor of the Bank of Spain. Since that first meeting, Berlin had sensed that Gandia would be an important figure to watch out for. One of them was because Gandia was a war veteran who would not hesitate to kill the enemy. When they returned from the Bank of Spain and negotiated the robbery plan, Berlin had even warned Professor to be careful with Gandia. If necessary, they should kill him. At the Bank of Spain, Berlin's warning did not go unheeded. After escaping, Gandia immediately sought out Nairobi, who was then the weakest member of the heist. Gandia approached Nairobi's bed and smothered him with a pillow. Fortunately, Nairobi could still rebel and grabbed a syringe and stabbed Gandia many times. Right at that moment, one hostage saw Gandia's action, which made him immediately run away. Tokyo and Helsinki, who saw the state of Nairobi, finally learned that Gandia had escaped and immediately tried to find him. But Gandia trapped Helsinki and hung him before taking his rifle. At that time, Tokyo saw Helsinki hanging and called Bogota to help save him. In the end, all the heist members found out about Gandia, who managed to save himself and even stole Helsinki's gun, and they blamed Rio. Professor followed the heist members' argument through the CCTV camera and tried calming Denver's anger. In addition, Professor also assured them that Rio was not a traitor. He also asks them all to focus on finding Gandia instead of spending time blaming each other, considering Gandia is not an ordinary prisoner. At the same time, Gandia managed to get into the surveillance room and tampered with the CCTV system so that the Professor could not monitor the situation inside the Bank of Spain building. Gandia then sneaked through a ventilation shaft into the Bank of Spain governor's bathroom, where there was a secret room door. Gandia managed to get into the room, which turned out to be a security room, and immediately contacted the police using the special phone provided. Before long, Gandia began communicating with the police at the headquarters outside the Bank of Spain building, and he informed Tomeo of the current situation. There was also internal CCTV in the room which allowed Gandia to keep an eye on the situation inside the Bank of Spain building despite having tampered with the external CCTV system. Then Gandia told Tomeo he was determined to attack the heist members using the weapons in the room. At police headquarters, Anton listens in on Tomeo and Gandia's conversation and immediately reports to Professor, who directly relays the information to Tokyo. Unfortunately, right after Tokyo receives a phone call from the Professor, Gandia attacks her from behind. Then Gandia took Tokyo to keep her in a secret security room. He plans to use Tokyo as a tool to divide the heist members. Afterward, Gandia used the phone in the security room to announce his gratitude to Palermo. The heist members who heard this immediately became angry with the group leader. Then Professor contacted them and interrogated Palermo about his betrayal. Palermo admitted his mistake and apologized to Professor, eventually allowing him to rejoin the heist group. Afterward, Professor asked the heist members, especially Palermo, to focus on the mission to capture Gandia. Even so, Professor still assured them that there would be punishment for Palermo when the situation was back under control. Professor began to develop a new plan for Gandia's capture mission. He divided the heist group into several teams to facilitate the search. Long story short, Rio paired up with Denver to comb the hallways in search of Gandia. But on the other hand, Gandia was watching them through CCTV monitors and had prepared an attack plan. When Denver and Rio got into the elevator, Gandia threw a bomb right before the elevator doors closed, trapping the two. Rio and Denver acted quickly by covering the bomb with helmets and vests to minimize the explosion, and they survived. On the other hand, Helsinki and Palermo heard the explosion and immediately ran toward the sound source, where they found Rio and Denver inside the elevator. While Helsinki and Palermo were busy rescuing Denver and Rio, Gandia appeared and began to attack. A firefight ensued, with Helsinki and Palermo struggling to contain Gandia's onslaught. Bata, who were guarding Nairobi, heard the gunfire and ran to help Palermo and Helsinki. The help from these two heist members turned the tide and put Gandia on the spot. He eventually ran from the crossfire to escape through the vents and instead entered Nairobi's room, who was alone. Gandia quickly paralyzed Nairobi and took her hostage. The heist members heard gunshots coming from Nairobi's room and began to arrive one by one. A plan was made where Helsinki and two other members would fire into the room while Denver and Rio would infiltrate the room through the ventilation holes. But just then, Gandia pulled Nairobi's head out through the hole in the door and threatened to kill Nairobi if they attacked him. The situation escalated when Gandia discovered that Rio and Denver were trying to get in through the vents and started shooting at them. The chaos inside the Bank of Spain building forced Professor to think about where Gandia's secret security room might be. After much thought, Professor realized they must have designed the room to save the governor of the Bank of Spain in a pinch. So logically, the room would be close to the governor's office. Professor immediately contacted Palermo to relay this information while Palermo was trying to negotiate with Gandia for Nairobi's safety. In the end, Gandia agreed to release Nairobi if he was allowed out of the room. After that, Professor began to execute his next plan. He contacted the other teams to find where Sierra had tortured Rio. After finding the location, Professor asked Marseille to come and collect evidence of Sierra's torture of Rio. Meanwhile, more chaos begins when one of the captives, Arturo Roman, gets hold of the cell phone that Sierra had previously used to contact Nairobi. Arturo told another hostage to call the police using the cell phone, and once connected to the call, Arturo gave Tomeo information about the situation inside the building. He also told the police that now was the best time to go in and start the attack because the heists were so busy trying to capture Gandia that there was no one guarding the lobby. Meanwhile, Gandia had made it out of the room with a gun to Nairobi's head. But unexpectedly, once out of the room and releasing Nairobi, Gandia shot Nairobi right in the head and then fled with a shower of weapons from the heist group. Nairobi collapsed and died immediately, which made all heist members express their anger and sadness. They did not expect that Gandia would break the negotiations to kill Nairobi. At that moment, Denver ran after Gandia and threw a grenade just before he entered the security room. Although Gandia managed to get into the room, he was seriously injured and eventually fell unconscious. Long story short, the heist members went ahead with the plan and started looking for the security room as directed by Professor. Palermo finally managed to find the room. When he informed Professor, Palermo also told him about Nairobi's death. The news left Professor stunned for a moment before he told Palermo that they would retaliate 100-fold for Nairobi's death. From that moment on, Professor tried to be calmer so that the execution of their plan could take place in a more controlled manner. The first order Professor gave was for Palermo to cut the phone lines in the security room so that Gandia could no longer contact Tomeo. After that, Professor asked them to make a hole to put the sleeping bed in the room. Professor also added that they would not kill Gandia for now as he had other plans for him. Outside the Bank of Spain building, Tomeo follows Arturo's information and prepares the troops to try to get inside. Just as the troops were about to enter, the lobby doors opened and 4 of the governor's bodyguards came out carrying a coffin containing Nairobi's body. This was done by Professor as a final tribute to Nairobi. At that moment, silence fell over the people and police officers who surrounded the Bank of Spain building. Even Lisbon, who saw the incident from the surveillance camera inside the police headquarters, immediately cried, knowing that one of the heist members was dead. Deep sadness was also shown by Professor and all the heist members who looked at Nairobi's coffin getting into the car. The plan is back on track. This time, Professor released a video of Rio being tortured during his arrest by the police. The video, which was widely released to the public, led the public to condemn the actions of the police, especially Colonel Luis Prieto and Sierra. Chaos ensued at the police headquarters as the video and news coverage of the torture damaged the credibility of the police as protectors of the community. Tomeo ordered Prieto to lie and deny the torture. At the same time, the Serbian group led by Benjamin came to meet the professor. The task of this group is to go on a mission to rescue Lisbon or Raquel, who is also the professor's lover. The professor gathered all the members of the Serbian group and began to teach them about the plan to free Lisbon. On the other hand, Gandia had regained consciousness despite having wounds all over his body. Tokyo also offered to help Gandia treat his wounds. Although he initially refused, Gandia realized he had no other choice but to accept the offer. Outside the Bank of Spain building, the police held an open press conference where Prieto addressed the media to deny the Heist group's allegations of torture against Rio. This prompted the professor to release the evidence of torture that Marseille had previously collected from Prieto's confession. The media who received the video from the professor at that time also immediately asked Prieto many questions, which of course he could not answer. The situation was even more urgent for the police because public sympathy would fall on the Heist group. Tameo realized this and ordered Sierra to come forward and admit to the torture. Not only that, but Tameo also demanded that Sierra admit the torture was done for personal gain. The scene returns to the security room at the Bank of Spain building where Tokyo is removing multiple bullets from Gandia's body. Although initially doing a good job, Tokyo steals the opportunity when Gandia is caught off guard and beats him unconscious. Knowing Gandia was incapacitated, Bogota immediately entered the room by breaking down the door. Even so, they made sure that Gandia did not die, as per Professor's orders. At the same time, Professor began to execute the third plan by releasing a video confession that the police had illegally arrested one of the Heist members, Raquel Murillo. Professor's publicly released video confession forced the police to bring Lisbon out of the headquarters to undergo a proper examination. Surprisingly, when Lisbon came out of the headquarters, he saw a large crowd of people who supported the professor's actions. People even went through the security barricades to encourage her. The attitude of the community was completely different when Prieto and Tameo came out, where they were greeted with resentment from the community. Sierra finally did appear in front of the media and gave a confession about torturing Rio according to Tameo's orders. The surprise came as Sierra's confession about the mastermind of the torture was different from Tameo's previous order. She did not admit that the torture was done for personal reasons but instead said that the torture was done based on orders from superiors in the police and the government. At headquarters, Tameo showed his anger while watching the live broadcast of Sierra's press conference. On the other hand, Benjamin and Marseille came to a location to start the Lisbon rescue mission. They both entered the former Chinese restaurant located right next to the courthouse and started digging to create a tunnel with a parking lot basement. Inside the Bank of Spain building, the Heist members had captured Gandia and Helsinki was treating his injuries. On the other hand, Sierra, who was inside her office, started thinking about the robbery. She senses an irregularity that leads her to think that one of the police officers, Anton, has been working with Professor. After that, Sierra grabbed the gun from the table and went to investigate the robbery case secretly. Sierra was also intent on proving her innocence. Sierra's investigation led her to Anton's wife, who provided CCTV of the apartment where they lived. From the CCTV footage, Sierra managed to get evidence that Anton did meet Professor and Marseille. In addition, Sierra also obtained the license plate number of the car used by Professor at the time. She asks for help from a police colleague to start investigating where the car is. In the courtroom, Lisbon told the investigators about the robbery plan. Previously, when giving lessons to Heist members, Professor had said that if Lisbon was caught, then she had to tell all the robbery plans in detail until investigators and even prosecutors were tired of listening to her. But at that moment, chaos broke out again inside the Bank of Spain building when Arturo grabbed a gun from one of the Heist members and started threatening them. The Heist members were made to retreat by Arturo's threats until finally one of the female captives, who turned out to be a Heist member named Manila, sneaked back, brandished a gun, and shot Arturo in the leg. The scene shifts back to the courthouse where Benjamin has managed to make a hole leading to the parking lot. After learning about the progress, Professor hacks into the surveillance camera in the courthouse parking lot so that Benjamin's work in covering the hole with a fake wall is not discovered by the security guards. Inside the Bank of Spain building, Heist members asked Gandia to make a false report to Tameo saying he was ready to attack the robbers. Hearing the report, Tameo asked Suarez, the head of the special team, to start preparing the troops to rescue Gandia. While the police focused on Gandia's impending attack, the Serbia team began their plan to liberate Lisbon. The plan went smoothly, with Benjamin leading a group of Serbia to ambush the police escorting Lisbon in the courthouse parking lot. They would then strap bombs to the bodies of the escorting policemen and force them to exit the building as if nothing had happened. Lisbon was then taken through a hole in the parking lot and straight to the helicopter that had been prepared to take her to Professor's place. Tokyo threatened Gandia to keep reporting to Tameo as if he would be on the roof of the building and requested that the police evacuate. On the other hand, Serbia's team sabotaged the helicopter Tameo had prepared for the evacuation, so what came to the roof was the helicopter that originally took Lisbon to escape. The police saw a shootout between Gandia and the Heist group on the roof. What happened was that Denver pretended to be Gandia and used a fake gun to have a shootout with the Heist group, who of course also used a fake gun. While in action, Tokyo was tasked with taking out several police officers who were preparing to attack them. The charade is done so that Professor can bring Lisbon into the building without the police knowing. When Lisbon finally made it into the building and was greeted by the other heist members, Tomeo realized that the shootout on the roof was nothing but a charade. It wasn't just the heist members who rejoiced that Lisbon was free and joined them. Professor also expressed the same joy at headquarters. Unbeknownst to him, Sierra had secretly sneaked into the headquarters, and Money Heist Season 4 closed with Sierra pointing a gun at Professor. The moral of the series is of course not to commit crimes like robbery. Even so, it must be admitted that the Money Heist-style smart robbery will be quite mesmerizing.